Okay, today we are going to be reading the first part of our first section on rivers and groundwater, and the first section is surface water, and we actually break it up into two different readings. The first reading today is going to be pages 19 to 21, where it is going to talk more about rivers, and then the second part will be ponds and lakes. So we're going to start with surface water here on page 19. Imagine that you are a raindrop falling from the clouds to Earth's surface. Down, down you go, and then splash. You land in the tumbling waters of a fast moving stream. You're in one of Earth's freshwater sources. Freshwater on Earth may be moving, as in streams or rivers, or still, as in ponds and lakes. All freshwater, however, comes from precipitation. For example, the Rio Grande, or the Big River, that's what Rio Grande means, begins as trickles of melting snow high in the San Juan Mountains in Colorado. But 700 kilometers downstream, the Big River lives up to its name as it flows past Albuquerque, Mexico. So it actually starts out high in the mountains, which we'll call the headwaters, which we'll read about in a little bit. And what happens is all these little small little rivers and rills and little creeks come together to form a bigger river, which that river will then feed into another river. And all of these sort of littler rivers come together to form a bigger river. And that's a river system. And that's what we're going to be reading about. River systems. If you were hiking in the mountains of Colorado, you could observe the path of the runoff from the melting snow. Runoff is any of the water that runs off the land that doesn't sink into the ground. So it might run into a stream here in Wheaton. It might run off the curbs into the sewers. But up in the beginning of the mountains, of the beginning of a river, it's runoff and it forms from melting snow, and these little uh, paths of the water come together. So as you followed one small stream downhill, you would notice that the stream reached another stream and joined it. These streams flow into a small river. Eventually, this path will lead you into the Rio Grande itself. Figure 11 shows you the parts of a typical river. I'm going to come back up to tributaries, but up here, this would be the headwaters, and all of this snow would melt, and those little rivers and little streams, little rills, as they might be called, come together. And you might have, one coming together here. These guys join here. Then these guys join. These guys join. And you can see all of these little beginnings join together. And that's called the headwaters. Many small streams that come together at the source of a river are called the headwaters. And the steep slope, how the land is like this, gravity pulls the water down, it pulls it together, so it's always running in the same direction. The steep slope of the land causes the river to flow quickly. As you move down the river, you can see this sort of ends up becoming the main river, but you can see over here you have a smaller river that eventually feeds into it. That's called a tributary. Tributaries are the streams and smaller rivers that feed into a main river. They also flow downhill and they flow toward that main river. So you can see this one is our main one, and this is a smaller tributary. This is an oxbow lake. Sometimes a meander, we're going to read about a meander, but a meander is a curve in a river. But sometimes a meander, the river at one point probably went like this, and eventually it curved around and it cut a new straight course. And this river was eventually some soil and sediment filled in here, and it cut that off. And this became a lake since it was no longer moving water. It went from being a part of the river system to an oxbow lake. Any curve, like we said, is called a meander. A meander is a looping curve in a river. Now this flat, you'll notice up here we have a lot of steep land. When you get to the flatter, broad area, that's called the floodplain. The broad, flat valley through which a river flows is its floodplain. And then all river flows towards the ocean. Where a river empties, at its mouth, the river flows into another body of water. The river slows down and deposits its sediments it carries, creating a delta. You've probably heard about like the Nile River Delta when you studied ancient Egypt and how they the banks would flood every year, and they knew that, and then they would plant after that. So here you have the mouth of this river because it feeds into another river, and here you have the mouth of this river feeding into what looks like a lake or something like that. So we'll go back up now and we will start to read tributaries. The tributaries, the streams and smaller rivers that feed into a main river are called tributaries. Tributaries flow downward toward the main river, pulled by the force of gravity. A river with all of its tributaries and whatnot make up that river system. It's all the little rivers that feed into the main river, including the main river. Now, the major watersheds of the United States, you can see here, like we have 4 main watersheds, but all of these really large watersheds, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, are actually made up of smaller watersheds. A watershed, as we will read, is all of the land where the water would run off to that would feed a tributary of a river. So this is called the Mississippi River watershed, meaning all of this land and all of these little smaller rivers, they eventually feed into the Mississippi River. All of these little tributaries here, the when it rains here over here in Ohio, and that water runs off the land into the Ohio River. The Ohio River then feeds into the Mississippi River. So this then is part of the Mississippi River watershed. Now, this might be a part of the Ohio River watershed, as you can see. This is the Mississippi River watershed itself, and over here we have the Missouri River watershed. But all of those are a part of the greater Mississippi River watershed because they all feed into that main river. And you can break watersheds into the smaller ones that feed into the bigger ones. So let's read about that. Just as all the water in a bathtub flows toward the drain, all the water in a river system drains into a main river. The land area that supplies water to a river system is called a watershed. Watersheds are sometimes known as drainage basins. As you can see in Figure 12, the Missouri and Ohio rivers are quite large, but they flow into the Mississippi River. So the Ohio River and the Missouri River still all flow into the Mississippi River. So large rivers may be tributaries of still larger rivers. When rivers join another river system, the areas they drain become part of the larger river's watershed. You can identify a river's watershed on a map by drawing an imaginary line around the region drained by all its tributaries. The watershed of the Mississippi River, the largest river in the United States, covers nearly 1/3 of our country. And then we have something called divides. Divides divide where rain lands. What keeps watersheds separate? One watershed is separated from another by a ridge of land called a divide. Streams on each side of the divide flow in different directions. The Continental Divide, the longest divide in North America, follows the line of the Rocky Mountains. I'm going to come back up here and show you. Here's the Rocky Mountains. So any water that falls here, if it falls closer to this side, it's going to eventually lead over here to the Columbia River. If it falls over here, it's eventually going to lead to the Mississippi River. So wherever that rain falls on one side, it's going to be on that part of the watershed. If it falls on the other, it'll be the other part of the watershed. So here we go. Sorry. So the Continental Divide, again, the longest divide in North America, follows the line of the Rocky Mountains. West of the Continental Divide, the water flows either towards the Pacific or into the Great Dry Basin, the Dry Great Basin. Between the Rocky Mountains and the Appalachian Mountains, water flows toward the Mississippi River or directly into the Gulf of Mexico. So between the Rocky Mountains here, right here, and the Appalachian Mountains over here on the East Coast, those are the divides. Those are the land areas that separate where the water flows. And you can see between those two mountains is pretty much the entire Mississippi River watershed. We are going to stop for this section here. You'll read about still water, which would be ponds and lakes, in the next section.